My name is Brandon, 34 years old, and I once owned a thriving custom furniture business that I built from nothing. My parents and I were close, or so I thought, until the incident that changed everything. When my brother Trevor burned my workshop to the ground, destroying my livelihood and years of hard work, my parents chose to defend him instead of supporting me. Their betrayal cut deeper than the loss itself, so I made a decision that would ensure justice in my own way. Before I dive into this story of family betrayal, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to follow my journey of standing up for myself when no one else would. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Portland, where life seemed normal on the surface. Our house was nothing special, a 3-bedroom suburban home with a small yard. But my parents, Robert and Martha, worked hard to provide for us. From an early age, though, I noticed the difference in how they treated me versus my brother Trevor, who was 3 years younger. Despite being the older brother who generally followed rules and excelled in school, I always felt like I was held to a higher standard. Trevor was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. When he acted out, which was often they would rush to make excuses for him, he is just expressing himself, they would say. Or, he is still finding his way. I cannot count how many times I heard those phrases growing up. One incident that stands out was when I was 12 and Trevor was 9. I had spent weeks working on a science project about renewable energy, building a working model of a wind turbine. The night before it was due, Trevor had a tantrum because he wanted to watch his cartoon show while I was finishing up in the living room. When I would not move my project, he knocked it over, breaking several key components. Instead of punishing him, my parents told me I should have been more considerate of his feelings and worked somewhere else. I stayed up all night rebuilding it, but still only got a B+ because it did not function perfectly. Trevor never even apologized. This pattern continued throughout our teenage years. I worked hard in school, joined clubs, and held part-time jobs from the age of 16. I saved most of my earnings planning for the future even then. Trevor, meanwhile, skipped classes, got into fights, and expected our parents to give him money whenever he wanted something. After high school, I worked 2 jobs to put myself through state college. I was determined to get a business degree with a minor in design, taking extra classes, and working nights and weekends. Meanwhile, Trevor attempted community college for 1 semester before dropping out, claiming it was not for him. My parents were understanding, of course, and continued supporting him financially while he found himself. My passion for woodworking came from my grandfather, who had a small workshop in his garage. During summer breaks, I would spend weeks with him, learning how to turn raw lumber into beautiful functional pieces. The smell of sawdust and the satisfaction of creating something with my hands became my escape from the inequity at home. My grandfather recognized my talent and left me his tools when he passed away during my junior year of college. Those tools were priceless to me, not just for their monetary value, but for the connection they represented. After graduating with honors, I took a job with a respected furniture company, determined to learn the business side of woodworking. For 5 years, I absorbed everything I could about running a successful operation, while continuing to develop my craft after hours. I lived frugally in a small apartment, driving an old truck and saving every penny I could toward my dream of opening my own shop. During this time, Trevor bounced from job to job, never lasting more than a few months anywhere. He would either quit because the work was beneath him, or get fired for showing up late, or not at all. After each failure, he would move back home, and my parents would support him until he found something new, which often took months. They paid off his credit card debt, covered his car payments, and gave him spending money like he was still a teenager. It was during my time at the furniture company that I met Rachel. She came in looking for a custom dining table for her new apartment, and we connected immediately over a shared love of mid-century design. She was a graphic designer with her own growing business, and she understood my entrepreneurial dreams in a way my family never had. Rachel encouraged me to take the leap when I felt ready, believing in my talent before I fully did myself. When I finally told my parents about my plans to start my own business, their response was lukewarm at best. "That sounds risky," my father said. "You have a good job with benefits. Why would you give that up?" My mother was concerned about the financial stability asking if I had considered how I would pay for health insurance. Just 2 months later, they gave Trevor $15,000 to start a food truck business despite his complete lack of experience in the food industry or any business at all. The truck operated for less than 3 months before Trevor abandoned it, claiming the hours were too demanding. My parents wrote it off as a learning experience and never mentioned the money again. The contrast in how they treated our ambitions could not have been clearer. While I had to fight for even verbal support, Trevor received financial backing without question. It was a pattern that had been established in childhood and would continue to define our family dynamics with consequences none of us could have imagined. Starting my custom furniture business was the hardest thing I had ever done, but also the most rewarding. After years of saving and planning, I had accumulated enough capital to make a modest start. Finding the right space was the first challenge. I needed a workshop with enough square footage for my equipment, good ventilation, reasonable rent, and preferably some natural light. After looking at 15 different properties, I found a former auto repair shop on the outskirts of town. It needed work, but the bones were good, and the rent was within my budget. I took out a small business loan to supplement my savings, putting everything on the line. The loan officer at the bank was impressed with my detailed business plan and portfolio of work, but warned me about the high failure rate of new businesses. "You need to be prepared for lean times," he advised. I assured him I was no stranger to hard work and frugality. The first month was spent renovating the space, installing proper electrical systems for my tools, improving the lighting, and creating a small showroom area where clients could view samples of my work. I did most of the renovation myself, working 16-hour days and sleeping on a cot in what would become my office. Rachel would bring me dinner and help when she could, often staying until midnight painting walls or organizing materials. When I finally opened Brandon Custom Furnishings, I had exactly $28.35 left in my business account. The pressure was enormous, but so was my determination. I launched a simple website featuring the pieces I had created over the years and began reaching out to interior designers in the area, offering to create custom pieces for their clients at competitive prices. For the first 6 months, business was slow. I took on any job I could get, from simple repairs to small custom pieces. I worried constantly about making rent and loan payments, often lying awake at night, calculating and recalculating my dwindling funds. There were days when I questioned everything, wondering if my parents had been right about the risks. Then came my first big break. An interior designer named Samantha was working with a tech executive who wanted a completely custom dining set for his newly renovated home. The budget was generous, and the project would give me a chance to showcase my best work. I spent days creating detailed sketches and a scale model determined to win the contract. When Samantha called to tell me I had gotten the job, I nearly dropped the phone. That single project changed everything. The client was so impressed with the finished dining set that he commissioned me to create pieces for his vacation home as well. More importantly, he shared photos of my work with his network of wealthy friends, several of whom reached out for consultations. Suddenly, I had a waiting list of clients willing to pay premium prices for my creations. As business grew, I was able to hire my first employee, a recent woodworking school graduate named Daniel, who shared my passion for craftsmanship. Having help allowed me to take on more projects and spend more time on the creative aspects of the business. 6 months later, I hired a part-time office manager to handle scheduling and invoicing, freeing me up even further. By the end of my second year, I had expanded the workshop into the vacant space next door, doubling my square footage and allowing for more efficient production. I invested in additional high-quality tools and machinery that improved both the quality and speed of our work. My team grew to include 5 skilled craftspeople, each bringing unique talents to our projects. My social media presence grew organically as clients shared photos of their custom pieces. A particularly striking conference table I created for a law firm went viral in design circles, leading to a feature in a prominent home design magazine. The exposure brought in clients from across the country, some willing to pay shipping costs that exceeded the price of the furniture itself. 3 years after opening, Brandon Custom Furnishings was not just surviving, but thriving. We had a 6-month waiting list for major projects, and I was in the position to be selective about the commissions we accepted. The business won a local award for entrepreneurial excellence, and I was invited to speak at my former college about building a successful creative enterprise. Through it all, Rachel remained my biggest supporter. She understood the sacrifices required to build something from nothing, often bringing her own design work to the shop, so we could spend time together during my long hours. We had moved in together, sharing a modest apartment that we rarely saw during daylight hours due to our busy schedules. I was saving up for an engagement ring planning to propose on our upcoming 4th anniversary. I had even designed and begun crafting a special jewelry box to hold the ring made from rare maple with intricate inlay work. Despite my growing success, my parents remained oddly unimpressed. When I invited them to the award ceremony, they attended, but spent most of the evening talking about Trevor's new job at a friend's car dealership, which he had started the week before. When the magazine featuring my work came out, my mother flipped through it quickly and then asked if I had considered creating more practical furniture that regular people could afford. Meanwhile, Trevor's life continued on its chaotic trajectory. The car dealership job lasted less than 2 months. Then came a stint as a bartender, followed by an attempt to become a personal trainer. Each new venture began with enthusiasm and ended with excuses. The only constants were his drinking and his increasingly obvious gambling problem. I had established a firm boundary years earlier about lending money to Trevor, having watched my parents drain their retirement savings to bail him out repeatedly. So when he showed up at my workshop one Friday afternoon, asking for $6,000 to pay off some guys he owed, I refused. I offered to help him find a steady job and recommended a counselor who specialized in gambling addiction, but I would not give him cash. Trevor did not take it well. His face turned red with anger, and he knocked over a tray of tools in frustration. "You think you are so much better than me with your fancy business and perfect girlfriend," he shouted. "But you are just a selfish jerk who does not care about family." Before leaving, he pointed at a set of dining chairs I was completing for an important client and said, "Better be careful with your precious workshop. Accidents happen all the time." I should have taken the threat more seriously. Instead, I swept up the scattered tools, rearranged the chairs he had disturbed, and went back to work, dismissing his words as empty anger. It was a decision I would regret for the rest of my life. I was working late one Tuesday night, putting the finishing touches on a custom entertainment center that was due to be delivered the following week. The client was particularly exacting, wanting precise measurements to accommodate specific audio-visual equipment. Rachel had left around 9, taking home the completed jewelry box containing the engagement ring I had finally purchased. I planned to propose that weekend during a hiking trip we had scheduled. Just after 11:30, my phone rang. It was Luis, one of my employees who lived in an apartment above a store across from the workshop. His voice was frantic, almost unintelligible. "Brandon, the shop is on fire." I called 911, but it is bad, really bad. I dropped everything and raced to my truck, driving well above the speed limit the entire way. From 6 blocks away, I could see the orange glow lighting up the night sky. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned the final corner and saw flames engulfing the entire building. 3 fire trucks were already on the scene, firefighters working desperately to control the blaze. But it was clear they were fighting a losing battle. I stumbled out of my truck, legs barely supporting me, as I watched my dream burning before my eyes. The heat was intense even from across the street, where police had established a perimeter. Luis found me there, putting his hand on my shoulder in silent support. Neighbors and a few of my other employees gradually arrived, forming a small group of witnesses to my catastrophe. "It spread so fast," Luis told me, his voice hollow with shock. "I saw someone running away just before I noticed the flames, but I did not get a good look. By the time I called emergency, the whole front was already burning." We stood there for hours as the firefighters fought the blaze. Eventually, the flames subsided, but not before consuming everything inside. The fire chief approached me around 2 in the morning, his face grim with news I already knew. "Nothing is salvageable. I am sorry." I returned at daybreak to survey the damage. The building was a blackened shell, the roof collapsed in several places. Everything was gone. The custom pieces we had been working on, tens of thousands of dollars in specialized tools and equipment materials, computers with all our designs, even my grandfather's tools that had sentimental value beyond measure, all reduced to ashes and twisted metal. As I walked the perimeter of the destruction, one of my employees found something in the debris near what had been my office. Somehow, the small fireproof safe where I kept important documents had partially protected a few items. Among them was the velvet pouch containing the engagement ring I had purchased for Rachel. The pouch was singed, but the ring inside was intact. A single, small miracle in the midst of total devastation. That afternoon, 2 detectives from the arson investigation unit arrived. They were direct and professional, explaining that several indicators pointed to the fire being intentionally set. The burn patterns suggest an accelerant was used, the female detective explained. And it appears the fire started in multiple locations simultaneously, which virtually never happens accidentally. Their next revelation hit me like a physical blow. The business across the street had a security camera that captured the street view, including the front of my workshop. The footage clearly showed someone breaking the front window, pouring liquid inside, and then throwing what appeared to be a lit object through the broken glass. Even in the grainy nighttime footage, I recognized the figure immediately. It was Trevor. Additional evidence quickly mounted. Empty vodka bottles and a gasoline can with Trevor's fingerprints were found discarded in the alley behind the workshop. When police picked him up at my parents' house, where he had been living again, he was still wearing the same clothes seen in the video, which smelled of smoke and gasoline. I went to the police station still in shock, needing to see him to understand why. They allowed me to speak with him briefly in an interview room with an officer present. Trevor was clearly hungover, his eyes, bloodshot hands shaking slightly. But what disturbed me most was his lack of remorse. "You should have given me the money," he slurred. "Those guys were going to break my legs. But you had to be all high and mighty like always. So yeah, I did it. How does it feel to lose everything? Not so perfect now, are you?" I left without saying another word, too numb to even feel anger in that moment. But the true betrayal was yet to come. When I called my parents to tell them what had happened, expecting their support and outrage on my behalf, their response left me speechless. "Well, you must have really upset him," my mother said. "Trevor would never do something like this without being provoked." "He was probably drunk," my father added. "You know he does not make good decisions when he is drinking. Besides, you have insurance, right? So no real harm done. He did not mean to hurt you personally." When I explained that Trevor had confessed and was facing serious charges, they became defensive. "We will get him a good lawyer," my father declared. "He needs help, not punishment." Not once did they ask how I was doing or offer to help me. Their concern was entirely for Trevor, the son who had deliberately destroyed my livelihood. When I pointed this out, my mother actually said, "Trevor is in jail, Brandon. You are fine. You have always been the strong one who lands on his feet." The final blow came the next day, when I met with Harold, my insurance agent. He grimly explained that while I did have fire insurance, the policy had specific exclusions for arson. If the fire had been accidental or caused by an unknown third party, you would be covered for full replacement value, he explained. But because the perpetrator is a family member, the situation falls under the intentional acts exclusion. I can fight for a partial payout based on some technicalities, but it will be nowhere near enough to rebuild. Just like that, I had lost everything. My business that I had poured my heart and soul into for 3 years. My employees were suddenly without jobs. Clients who had waited months and paid deposits would never receive their furniture. My reputation in the industry was at risk. And my family, the people who should have been my greatest support, had chosen to stand by the person who caused it all. In the span of 24 hours, my life had burned to the ground as surely as my workshop had. And I was completely on my own to figure out how to rise from the ashes. The weeks following the fire were the darkest of my life. I alternated between numbing depression and blinding anger, often unable to get out of bed. Rachel moved some of her work to remote so she could be with me, gently encouraging me to eat and occasionally stepping outside. She never pushed me to snap out of it or minimize what had happened, just provided steady support and reminded me that I was not alone. My best friend Marcus came by almost daily, sometimes just sitting in silence with me, other times helping me navigate the mountain of paperwork that comes with such a disaster. He was the one who suggested I start making lists of everything that had been lost for the insurance claim, giving me a small task to focus on when everything else seemed overwhelming. About 3 weeks after the fire, Marcus arrived looking concerned. "Have you talked to your parents lately?" he asked carefully. I had not. After our initial conversation, I had been avoiding their calls, unable to stomach their defense of Trevor. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me a local news article. My parents had put up their house as collateral to post Trevor's bail, which had been set at $100,000 due to the severity of the charges and his flight risk. "They are mortgaging their future for him," again I said bitterly, "while I have nothing." The small insurance settlement finally came through, but as Harold had warned, it was a fraction of what I needed. It would cover some of the outstanding loan payments and allow me to pay my employees a small severance. But there would be nothing left to restart the business. I had to call each client personally to explain the situation and return what deposits I could, conversations that left me emotionally drained and humiliated. My parents insisted on a family meeting at their house. Against my better judgment, and despite Rachel's concerns, I agreed to go, hoping for some acknowledgement of the gravity of what had happened. I should have known better. Their living room looked the same as always, family photos crowding every surface. I noticed that several recent pictures of me and Rachel had been replaced with new ones of Trevor, including one taken at the courthouse after his release on bail. He was not present for this meeting, having been ordered to stay with a cousin as part of his bail conditions. "We need to discuss how we are going to handle this as a family," my father began, as if we were dealing with a minor disagreement rather than arson and the destruction of my business. "Handle what exactly?" I asked already, feeling my blood pressure rising. "This situation with Trevor," my mother replied. "The prosecutor is being unreasonable. Your brother made a mistake, but they are treating him like a hardened criminal." A mistake? I could not believe what I was hearing. He deliberately burned down my business. Everything I worked for is gone. My father had the audacity to look annoyed. And as we said, that was wrong of him. "But you got insurance money, right? Maybe you could share some of that with Trevor for his legal fees. This is really taking a toll on him." I stared at them, wondering if I had somehow entered an alternate reality. "Are you serious? You want me to give money to the person who destroyed my livelihood?" "You always were so dramatic," my mother sighed. "If you had not antagonized him by refusing to help when he needed it, none of this would have happened." The conversation deteriorated from there. I learned that they had been covering Trevor's gambling debts for years. Amounts that made my head spin. They had tapped into their retirement accounts, taken out a second mortgage on their house, and even borrowed from family members, all to keep him from facing the consequences of his actions. "He has a problem," my father admitted, "but he is family, and we stand by family." "What about me?" I asked, my voice breaking, despite my efforts to stay composed. "Am I not family too?" The look they exchanged said everything. In their eyes, I had always been the self-sufficient one who did not need them. My success was taken for granted, while Trevor's failures were met with endless compassion and financial support. 2 days later, the court hearing for Trevor's case took place. I attended, sitting at the back of the courtroom watching in disbelief as my parents testified about Trevor's good character and difficult struggles. They brought up his childhood achievements, conveniently omitting the pattern of destructive behavior that had defined his adult life. Trevor himself showed no sign of remorse, occasionally smirking when the prosecutor described the damage he had caused. The judge, a friend of my father's golf buddy, sentenced him to just 6 months in county jail, with 3 years probation and mandatory counseling. The restitution ordered was a small monthly payment that would take 20 years to equal even half the value of what I had lost. The final straw came when I visited my parents one last time, hoping to make them understand the depth of the harm that had been done. Instead, I found them preparing their spare bedroom. "What is this for?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Trevor will need a place to stay after he serves his time," my mother explained, fluffing a pillow on the freshly made bed. "The important thing is that we all move forward as a family. You should forgive and forget Brandon. Holding grudges is not healthy." My father added, "Maybe when you rebuild your business, you could give Trevor a job. It would be good for him to learn your work ethic." I stood there, looking at these people who had raised me, trying to reconcile the loving parents of my childhood with the enablers before me now. But what they said next changed everything. "We will need to figure out these creditors who keep calling about Trevor's loans," my father mentioned casually. Since your name is on them too, they might start harassing you as well. What are you talking about? I asked, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. I never co-signed any loans for Trevor. My parents exchanged another of their looks. Well, not officially, my mother admitted. But we used your information a few years ago when Trevor needed money for his food truck business. Your credit was so much better than his, and we knew you would not mind helping family. That night, I discovered just how deep the betrayal went. Searching through my credit report, I found multiple loans and credit cards I had never applied for, some dating back 5 years. My parents had been using my social security number and personal information to secure financing for Trevor's failed ventures for years, committing identity theft against their own son. There were threatening letters from collection agencies for accounts I never knew existed. My previously excellent credit score had plummeted due to missed payments and defaults. Even if I had been in a position to start over, I would have been unable to secure any new business loans or lines of credit. That was the moment I knew I had to take action. This was not just about the fire anymore. My parents and brother had been systematically undermining my financial future for years while I worked tirelessly to build something. They would never change, and Trevor would continue to destroy not just my life, but theirs as well, if something did not change drastically. I made a decision that night that would alter all our lives forever. If they wanted to choose Trevor repeatedly, despite the damage he caused, they would finally have to face the consequences of that choice. And I would be the one to make sure of it. The next morning, I called Diana, a lawyer who had been a client of mine the previous year. I had crafted a custom desk for her office, and we had developed a friendly relationship during the process. She agreed to meet me immediately when I explained it was an urgent matter regarding identity theft and fraud. In her sleek downtown office, I laid out everything that had happened from the fire to the discovery of the fraudulent accounts. Diana listened intently, taking careful notes, and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she sat back in her chair, her expression serious. "Brandon, what your family has done goes beyond poor judgment. These are serious crimes," she said. "The identity theft alone carries significant penalties. Combined with the arson, there could be a case for a pattern of criminal activity." But then she revealed something that changed everything. "You mentioned your parents have had financial power over you at various points. Did they ever have power of attorney?" The question triggered a memory. Years ago, when I was 22 and planning a backpacking trip through South America, my parents had insisted I sign power of attorney documents in case something happened while I was traveling. I had signed without much thought, trusting them completely at the time. When I returned safely, I had forgotten all about it. "I think they might still have it," I admitted. "I never revoked it formally." Diana's expression shifted. "Interesting. And do you have any power of attorney for them?" Again, a memory surfaced. After my grandfather died, and my grandmother began showing signs of dementia, my parents had set up reciprocal power of attorney arrangements with me. "For simplicity's sake," my father had said, "so anyone in the family can handle emergencies." I had received copies of the documents but filed them away without much thought. Diana asked me to locate those documents immediately. I went home and dug through my filing cabinet, finding the folder containing the legal papers. When I returned to Diana's office that afternoon, she reviewed them carefully. "These are still valid," she confirmed. "Your parents never revoked your authority, probably because they forgot about it too." She looked up at me, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. "This gives you significant legal authority over their financial affairs." "What exactly does that mean?" I asked. "It means you could, in theory, make financial decisions on their behalf, including selling assets or transferring funds." She paused. "I am not suggesting anything, merely explaining the legal facts." Over the next hour, Diana outlined my options. I could file fraud charges against my parents and Trevor for the identity theft, which would likely result in criminal penalties for them. I could sue them civilly for the damages to my business, although collecting would be difficult given their financial situation. Or I could use the power of attorney to recover what had been taken from me. What would that entail exactly? I asked, a plan beginning to form in my mind. You could legally sell their house, access their bank accounts, or make other financial transactions on their behalf, Diana explained. It would all be technically legal due to the power of attorney. But she added with emphasis, there are ethical considerations. And they could later claim you abused your authority, though proving that would be difficult given the circumstances. I spent the next week investigating the full extent of the situation. I confirmed that my parents' house was fully paid off and worth approximately $450,000 in the current market. They had roughly $75,000 in savings and investment accounts. They were not wealthy, but they had assets that could help me rebuild my life after they had allowed Trevor to destroy it. Working with a fraud investigator, I also gathered concrete evidence that they had indeed forged my signature on multiple loan documents. The investigator photographed the signatures and obtained statements from the loan officers who had processed the applications. In some cases, my father had impersonated me on phone calls to verify the applications, a fact confirmed by recorded calls retrieved by the investigator. Armed with this information, I returned to Diana to finalize my strategy. The plan we developed was comprehensive. First, I would use the power of attorney to sell my parents' house, timing it for when they were on a weekend trip they had planned to visit Trevor in jail. Second, I would transfer most of their savings to a new account I had established, leaving them enough to rent a modest apartment temporarily. Third, I would file fraud charges against Trevor for the forged signatures, ensuring that when he was released from his short sentence for arson, he would immediately face new charges. Fourth, I would leave detailed documentation for my parents explaining what I had done and why, including copies of all the fraudulent documents and a full accounting of everything I had lost due to Trevor's actions. Finally, I would move to Arizona with Rachel, where I had a distant cousin in the furniture business who had offered me a fresh start in his workshop while I rebuilt my portfolio. Preparing for the inevitable fallout was difficult. Rachel was initially shocked by the extremity of my plan. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, as we discussed it in our apartment. "It seems so. Final." They left me nothing. I explained, my voice steady despite the pain beneath. They stole my identity, enabled Trevor to destroy everything I built, and then expected me to just forgive and move on. There have to be consequences. After seeing the full extent of the forged documents and hearing recordings of my father impersonating me on phone calls, Rachel understood. "They betrayed you in every possible way," she acknowledged. "I just worry about what this will do to you, carrying this forward." Her concern touched me, reminding me why I loved her. She was worried not about the ethics of my plan, but about the emotional toll it would take on me. "I need to do this," I told her. "Not just for justice, but so I can move forward knowing I did not let them destroy my future completely." The execution of the plan required careful timing. I found a real estate agent named Philip who specialized in quick sales, explaining that I needed to liquidate my parents' property quickly due to a family emergency. Given the desirable location of their house, he assured me he could find a buyer within 2 weeks, even at a slightly below market price. I set up security cameras around my parents' property, not to spy on them, but to document their reaction when they discovered what I had done. Marcus agreed to be nearby on the day they returned from their visit with Trevor, ready to record from a distance if needed. I wanted evidence in case they later tried to claim I had acted without authority. Diana reviewed all the paperwork multiple times, ensuring everything was legally sound. "Remember, the power of attorney gives you the legal right to do this," she reminded me. "But be prepared for them to fight it once they discover what has happened." I created a detailed paper trail, showing that all actions were taken with proper authority. I even drafted letters from my parents to themselves authorizing the sale and transfers signing their names as their attorney. In fact, which was legally permitted under the power of attorney. Everything would be technically legal, exploiting the very loopholes they had used against me for years. As the plan came together, I felt a strange calm, replace the turmoil of the previous weeks. This was not about revenge, though I could not deny the element of justice that motivated me. It was about reclaiming control of my life and ensuring that I would have a future, despite their betrayal. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Rachel asked the night before we were to begin executing the plan. "Once you do this, there is no going back. They will never forgive you." I looked at her, the woman who had stood by me through everything, who was willing to uproot her life and move across the country to help me start over. "They made their choice when they forgave Trevor for burning down my business," I said. "Now I am making mine." The execution of my plan began on a Friday morning when my parents left for their weekend visit to see Trevor at the county detention facility. They had mentioned the trip during our last conversation, unaware that their casual disclosure was a key piece of information for what I was about to do. Philip, the real estate agent, had found a buyer willing to pay $420,000 cash for a quick sale with minimal inspections. It was about $30,000 below market value, but the speed and certainty were worth the discount. Using my power of attorney, I signed all the necessary paperwork on my parents' behalf with Diana present to ensure everything was properly executed. The closing took place that afternoon. By 5 o'clock, the funds had been wired to a temporary account Diana had set up specifically for this transaction. From there, I transferred $350,000 to my new account in Arizona, leaving $70,000 in an account my parents could access. It was more than enough for them to secure temporary housing and legal representation if they chose to fight my actions. Next, I went to their bank and used the power of attorney to access their savings and investment accounts. In total, there was $76,500 across various accounts. I transferred $60,000 to my new account, leaving the rest for their immediate needs. Again, Diana documented everything meticulously, ensuring the paper trail was clear and legally sound. With the financial transfers complete, I filed the fraud charges against Trevor. The evidence was overwhelming: forged signatures on loan documents, recorded phone calls of my father impersonating me, and statements from loan officers who had processed the applications. The prosecutor assigned to the case assured me that these were serious charges that would likely result in additional jail time for Trevor consecutive to his arson sentence. The final step was leaving documentation for my parents. I prepared a thick envelope containing a detailed letter explaining what I had done and why. Copies of all the fraudulent loan documents with their forgeries, highlighted photographs of the burned workshop, and inventory lists of everything lost. A printout of my credit report, showing the damage done by accounts opened in my name. A full accounting of the funds I had taken and what had been left for them. Copies of the power of attorney documents they had signed years ago. Contact information for Diana if they too wish to pursue legal action against me. I placed this envelope on the kitchen table in their now empty house, along with the keys to the property and a note explaining that the new owners would be taking possession in 30 days. They would return from their weekend visit with Trevor to find their life dismantled just as mine had been. With everything in place, Rachel and I loaded our few remaining possessions into her car and my truck and began the long drive to Arizona. As the miles stretched between us and Portland, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. There was sadness, certainly, and anger still simmered beneath the surface, but there was also a sense of justice being served. We were 3 hours outside of Phoenix when my phone began buzzing constantly. First my mother, then my father, then unknown numbers. I assumed were other family members they had enlisted to try to reach me. I let them all go to voicemail, not ready for that confrontation yet. When we stopped for gas near the Arizona border, I listened to the first message from my mother. Her voice was high-pitched and frantic, almost unrecognizable. "Brandon, what have you done? We came home, and the house is empty, and there is this letter. Please call us immediately. This cannot be legal. You cannot do this to us." My father's message was more threatening. "You have gone too far, Brandon. This is criminal. We are calling the police. You will regret this betrayal for the rest of your life." There were 5 more messages, each more desperate than the last. In the final one, my mother was sobbing, asking where they were supposed to go, what they were supposed to do. "How could you do this to your own family?" she asked through tears. I waited until Rachel and I had reached our destination, a small rental house my cousin had helped us secure, before I returned their call. My father answered immediately. "You have 30 seconds to explain yourself before I have you arrested," he said by way of greeting. "The power of attorney you had me sign works both ways," I replied calmly. "Everything I did was legal. You can check with any lawyer. As for why I think the documentation I left explains that pretty clearly. We are your parents." My mother wailed in the background. "You have left us homeless." "I left you $70,000, I corrected her. "That is more than enough to rent a place and consult with lawyers if you want to try to fight this. But before you do, I suggest you read the fraud evidence I gathered. Because if you push this, I will make sure the prosecutors know about your role in the identity theft too, not just Trevor's." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then my father spoke, his voice cold. "You are no longer our son. Do not ever contact us again." "That is rich coming from you," I replied. "You made it clear Trevor was your only real son when you defended him after he burned down my business. I just made it official." I ended the call and blocked their numbers, along with those of several extended family members who had begun texting angry messages. Only then did I allow myself to feel the full impact of what had happened. Rachel held me as I finally broke down years of hurt and betrayal, pouring out in heaving sobs. The fallout was swift and far-reaching. Trevor was arrested on the new fraud charges the day he completed his arson sentence, denied bail, due to being considered a flight risk after the previous crimes. According to Marcus, who kept me updated from a distance, my parents had been forced to move in with my mother's sister in a small town 3 hours from Portland. Most of their friends had distanced themselves after learning the full story, particularly when the identity theft details became public following Trevor's arrest. The reactions from extended family were mixed. Some understood my actions, particularly those who had witnessed Trevor's destructive behavior over the years and my parents' enabling. Others condemned me entirely, seeing only a son who had taken advantage of his parents' trust. Most simply cut ties with our entire family, wanting no part of the ugly situation. Starting over in Arizona was harder than I had anticipated. Despite my cousin's help in securing workshop space, I had to rebuild my portfolio from scratch. My reputation in the industry had been damaged by the sudden closure of my business and the inability to complete client orders. I started with small local jobs, working longer hours than I had, even when first opening my original workshop. The strain took a toll on my relationship with Rachel as well. She had given up her established client base in Portland to move with me, and now had to rebuild her graphic design business in a new city where she had no connections. There were nights when we were both so exhausted and stressed that conversations devolved into tense silence or petty arguments over nothing. But slowly, piece by piece, we began to rebuild. I focused on creating a new signature style that incorporated elements inspired by the Arizona landscape, using local woods and design motifs that appealed to the high-end resort market in Scottsdale and Sedona. Rachel found a niche designing for local art galleries and cultural institutions. We learned to communicate better, to share our frustrations and fears instead of withdrawing into ourselves. 6 months after the move, I received a certified letter from a law firm representing my parents. They had consulted multiple attorneys about challenging my use of the power of attorney, but had been advised that their case was weak given the circumstances. Instead, they were formally severing all legal and financial ties to me, revoking any remaining powers of attorney, and removing me from their will. It was a final gesture of rejection that should have hurt, but instead felt like the closing of a chapter I had already moved beyond. It has been 2 years since I sold my parents' house and moved to Arizona with Rachel. 2 years of rebuilding, healing, and reflection. The journey has not been easy, but it has been transformative in ways I never could have anticipated. My new furniture business, which I simply call Brandon Crafted, has slowly gained traction in the Southwest. I started with small commissions for local homeowners, gradually building a new portfolio that reflected both my established craftsmanship and new design directions inspired by desert landscapes. The workshop is smaller than my Portland space, but it feels more authentically mine, untainted by painful memories. One of my first acts once the business became profitable was to track down my former employees and send them additional compensation beyond the small severance I had originally provided. They had lost their jobs through no fault of their own, and making things right with them was important to my own healing process. Several sent back warm messages of support, one even offering to relocate to Arizona if I ever needed skilled help again. After 18 months of hard work and careful saving, I felt ready to take the next step with Rachel. I designed and crafted a new ring box similar to the one that had been saved from the fire, but with design elements that represented our new life in Arizona. Inside, I placed a ring I had designed myself working with a local jeweler to create something unique that represented our journey together. I proposed during a sunset hike in Sedona, the red rocks glowing around us, as I asked her to continue building our life together. Her yes was immediate and tearful, both of us aware of how much we had overcome to reach this moment. We are planning a small wedding next spring, surrounded only by the friends who stood by us during our darkest times. As for my family, the news has reached me in fragments. Trevor was sentenced to 4 years for the fraud charges with no possibility of early release due to his prior conviction for arson. My parents lost most of their remaining social connections in Portland after the details of their involvement in the identity theft became public. According to Marcus, they now live permanently with my aunt, their financial situation precarious despite the funds I left them. 6 months ago, I received a letter from my mother. It was the first direct communication since our phone call after I sold their house. The letter was not an apology exactly, but it contained a kind of acknowledgement I never expected to receive. "We failed as parents," she wrote. "Not just to you, but to Trevor as well. Our inability to set boundaries destroyed both our sons in different ways. I do not expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what we did wrong." I did not respond. Perhaps someday I will, but I am not ready yet. The wounds are still healing, and I need to prioritize my own well-being before attempting any reconciliation. The emotional journey has been complex. At first, there was a certain satisfaction in knowing that my parents and Trevor were facing consequences for their actions after years of enabling and betrayal. But that feeling was hollow and faded, quickly replaced by waves of grief for the family relationships I had lost, even if they had never been what I thought they were. Therapy has been essential to my healing process. My therapist helped me understand that what I experienced was not just betrayal, but a form of family trauma that had been building for decades. She helped me process the complex emotions without judgment, acknowledging that my actions were a response to extreme circumstances, while also examining healthier ways to handle conflict in the future. The most important lessons I have learned through this experience are not what I expected. I thought this journey would teach me about justice or standing up for myself, and it did. But the deeper lessons have been about the true meaning of family, the importance of boundaries, and the power of choosing your own path forward. Family is not always the people who share your blood. Sometimes family is the partner who stands by you when everything falls apart. Family is the friend who drives across town just to sit with you in silence when words fail. Family is the cousin who offers you a chance to rebuild when your world has burned to the ground. Setting boundaries is not selfish, it is essential. For years, I allowed my parents' favoritism and Trevor's destructive behavior to impact my life because I thought that was what family meant. I now understand that healthy relationships require boundaries that protect all parties, and enabling harmful behavior is not an act of love, but a form of neglect. Finally, I have learned that it is possible to rise from complete devastation. When my workshop burned down and my family betrayed me, I thought my life was over. I could not see a path forward through the ashes. But piece by piece, day by day, I have built something new. Not a replica of what was lost, but something different, perhaps stronger, for having been forged in fire. I do not regret the actions I took. They were extreme, yes, but they were necessary for me to break free from a toxic family dynamic and create a chance for a new beginning. Sometimes, the only way forward is to burn the bridges that lead back to places that no longer serve your growth. As I stand in my new workshop, sawdust in my hair, and plans for my future spread before me, I feel a sense of peace that once seemed impossible. The past will always be part of my story, but it no longer defines who I am or what I can become. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect yourself from family who betrayed your trust? Where do you draw the line between forgiveness and self-preservation? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we are born into. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that even from complete destruction, new beginnings are possible.